Hi, my name's Tiara.
My name is Jen.
And together we are the
Doula Business Blueprint.
Oh, look at that. We didn't even
What?
rehearse that. I think after this we're going to do a girl group.
Yeah.
They always break up, though.
No, we don't want to do that. We need a theme song. Yeah.
I'll
whole
give you
thing.
a song. I'm a
Okay.
church kid, so I'm always ready to sing.
All right. I think I want to start by talking about how we met,
Right.
which
Yeah.
was almost exactly 2 years ago at the
Yes.
first Doula Co-op of Nevada in-person meeting when
Yes.
the nonprofit launched. And I
Yes.
remember you walked in the room and I was like, oh my gosh, you are so beautiful.
Oh, you're so kind. You were the most talkative.
Oh.
In a good way, because we were talking, it was the very, very beginning of all the Medicaid stuff. So you were the only one that knew anything. And I was like, she knows everything. I can't wait. And we met immediately right after that on Zoom.
Yes.
Because that's when you were doing your quick meetings, because you were putting together the database, right?
Yep, I was. Yeah. And then since then we've kept in touch. We've seen each other. And then when the research project happened, like not quite a year ago it started, we were on different sides.
It was around this time last
Right.
year, yeah.
We were on different sides of the research project.
Correct.
And which was interesting because like I always wanted to be on the same side as you. And we would have gotten to know each other that way, but we got to know each other in a really different way because we were on opposite sides of it. And it was that interaction. And then we talked about starting a business together.
Yeah, yeah. I already had conceptually, so obviously we have our individual businesses.
Yep.
But I already conceptually was like, I want to do something different, do something new. That's my other business.
Right.
I wanted to do something different. Like, I love seeing families. We talk about this all the time.
Yep.
I love seeing families. I obviously love being at births, but I was like, my strength is in mentoring.
Yeah.
Helping other doula I've been a business owner for 13 years. You're one of the only other doulas that I met that has been in business a decade or longer.
Correct.
And so I started to think about and talk to people like you and other people about like, it's interesting that doulas are forced into business ownership. I mean, really, It's not even they're forced into business ownership and don't really take the time or get the time to figure out what that's like.
Yeah, and I think wanting to be a doula and help people is one piece, and without realizing that there's this whole other piece about business ownership that they don't really consider. It's like heartfelt hobby, and that's not what it is, and that can be really challenging.
It is.
Also, I was doing all the Medicaid stuff, and
I was blown away. I'm like, is this not a business of yours?
Well, and it was kind of like you should make in one of the big meetings, the board meetings we had, it was like someone said you could charge for this, and I'm like, I know I could charge for this. And that's really kind of hit home because I was like, I need to diversify my doula business so that I have something different like the Medicaid project that I charge for because it's so much time and energy. And that's when you approached me about Doula Business Blueprint.
Yep, I sure did.
And here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. It was really quick, like one night stand into a marriage.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were just going to be a friends with benefits, but then it was so much more.
It was so good the first time you kept coming back.
I did keep coming back. So we're going to ask each other questions. This is kind of like so people can get to know us better.
Yeah.
You want to go first?
Rapid fire. No, you go.
Okay. What kind of training did you do to become a doula, and did anything surprise you?
Damn, I should have.
We should have read our own questions, which we didn't.
What kind of training? So I've been a business owner for a while. So I'm also an Air Force veteran. So I'm all about structure, right? Like, show me the way to do it, and I'm going to get it done.
Yep.
And as we know, doula work is not that. You get to pick your own path. You get to pick your own trainings. You get to pick your own way of how you're going to become a doula. So I've navigated various trainings. I won't say their names just so I don't. Well, I'm going to say the one that later that I love promoting and I don't have an issue. They don't pay me and they should.
Yeah.
But I navigated many different trainings. I think that's the same start for a lot of doulas. The first time I navigated one, I was like, oh, they're at the top of the Google search. They must be The best one, I knew better as a marketer. I'm like, they just paid better.
Right.
For SEO and marketing.
Yep.
But after the first one, I immediately was like, we didn't talk about business. We didn't talk about marketing. We didn't talk about what do I do once I got this training on how to support people, how to help people. And we didn't talk about continuation of training. It was in person, 2 to 3 days. And then they were like, boom, go do your thing, girl. And I knew, I was like, that ain't enough. So then I went back to Google, did another training. And then I went into just my own research, which again, I think a lot of doulas do. I read a lot of books, just about how to be a doula, how to support people. I think our go-to one is like something about being a partner, but it's like really it's telling you how to be a doula. I wish I remember the name off the top of my head. It's like an orange book. And that was really it, self-taught. So then I went into, after I had a difficult birth, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, I had a really challenging birth. I went to school to become an MA, medical assistant. Even though I know doulas are non-medical providers, I was like, I hated standing in that room, feeling like people were talking around me, people were saying stuff that I didn't understand. I just hated that feeling. I hated that I wasn't fully, I had imposter syndrome heavy after my first year, maybe year and a half in doula work. I'm like, I really don't know what I don't know. And so I went to MA school just because I was like, I just want to know. I'm not going to apply this for anybody watching. Doulas are non-medical providers. But I was like, I want to know if they're saying mom's BP is this or da-da-da. I want to know if that's true or not.
Right.
Because I felt like sometimes I'm like, you're not acting like it's an emergency. So I was like, how do I know? So MA school was awesome. It was hands-on. It was like 7 months. The best thing that I got out of it was, I'm telling a really roundabout way about my training, but it's relevant. The best thing that I got out of it was they made you do an externship. So you had to do a certain amount of hours, and I was adamant. And they send you anywhere. But I was like, being me, I'm like, I did not do all of this for you to send me to a dental office. Right. I want to go to an OB office, which I eventually did. What I, a roundabout way, did was like tank the other interviews. Because you have to interview for it. And then when they finally linked me up, it was like my third interview, linked me up with the OB office. I killed it. And they liked me. And I was there for, I could only do part-time because I still had my other business to run, my doula business to run, my marketing business, kids, husband. But I did 2 months, 2.5 months. It was like over a summer, so like from May to maybe August. And I learned the inner workings of the back office side of how OBs see so many clients. How do they talk to moms? And we did the intake as MAs, and we spent most of the time with these pregnant moms. And I knew that from experience because with my 2 kids, first time I had an OB, second time I had a midwife. With the OB, I was like, I see you for 5 minutes every appointment. I've been here for an hour and a half. And it was that same way in this office that I was doing the externship in. I also did a little recon or like just informal surveying with the OBs. I'm like, what do you think about doulas? Without telling them I was a doula. And so I got good feedback in that way. Like one of them was like, I feel like they're in the way. They're annoying, blah, blah, blah. Also the misconceptions. One of them was like, they bury placentas in backyards. Like, it was just so off. And I was like, I mean,
it's not wrong, but it's not that's not the whole story.
Exactly. So it was just a really good, that was the best thing I got out of the MA training, which was my intention. So I'm glad I did it. And then I was like, I need to do another doula training. And I'm just like, girl, you just keep giving these people your money. But I did. And the one that I did that I loved was BADT, Birth Advocacy Doula Trainings, because the way that they advertised it, one, was incredible. My marketing brain was like, I'm sold. And then when I got in the training, they covered every aspect. And it was like, I can come out of here with a niche. I can come out of here with the knowledge. And then if I want to return to the content, I'm golden. Like, it was incredible. It was the best training to date. Minus the Doula Business Blueprint.
Minus our, obviously.
Which is different. So.
Very different. But we've taken a lot of, like, I've also done a ton of trainings. My first round in birth work was 12 years. After the birth of my first daughter. And I worked with a midwifery group in Alaska where I lived. Off and on for 7 years. So it was hands-on, much more than birth work, than a birth program. I love hands-on so much. But at that point, I was thinking I was going to become a midwife. And then for family reasons, for personal reasons, I had to stop birth work, which was the hardest couple of years of my adult life. The whole situation that I was in at that time was so hard, and giving up birth work was a huge part of why that was hard. And I thought I'd never go back to it. And then one of my daughters became a doula, kept saying, Mom, come back, come back. And then my husband, not knowing about my daughter, we had this great conversation where he was like, you know, you're the happiest person I know, but you're not fulfilled. And I had my own business as a VA for 7 years that was financially successful.
Yeah.
But I didn't love it.
Yeah.
I did it because I was good at it and because I could work from home and homeschool.
Right.
And I ended that job and went back to do birth work, thinking I was going to pick up where I left off and become a midwife.
Right.
And when I looked into that after 17 years of not being in birth work, you know, the political climate changed, the costs changed, apprenticing changed, laws in Nevada where we live. I was like, nope, and I went the doula route. I'm so grateful. But also tons of trainings.
Yeah.
And then that's a huge part of why I wanted to be on the Nevada certification board, because for doulas, and I do the education, and then I take all of these birth doula trainings. And here's the thing, most of them mean well and aren't great, or they're good at what they do, but they're so limited, it doesn't really prepare doulas.
I agree.
And part of me feels like that's okay, they need to stay in their lane and just do this portion, but then where do doulas get the other portions that they need? And that's also why we started Doula Business Blueprint.
Yeah, because I also feel like people get tired of, we just express that, I'll take training after training, but the average person is going to be like, come on now. Like, I want it to be all captured in one. And obviously I'm going to push in a bias of like, if people could start anywhere, they should start with the blueprint, because one, it's a blueprint, but also, so that way you don't waste time. So if you're in here and you're like, okay, they're telling me there's various ways that I can do doula work. Like in the course we talk about, do you want to do this as a speaker? Do you want to do this with families? Or like I had mentioned, I love being with families, but I like mentoring. And that's my jam. And that's like where I fulfilled, like your husband told you. And so if people start here, then they'll know like, oh, okay, I really didn't want to go into postpartum doula work like I thought. Right. And then they're not going to waste time and money and energy into the training.
I agree.
How many trainings have you done?
Oh my gosh. I honestly, at least 5. But
That's not bad.
No, but more than that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And
more like those additional ones, maybe. So like trauma informed. And
well, no, that's not including that. That's just birth doula, at least 5. And my favorite that I've done, I didn't do BADT, but is Kappa.
Oh, I heard great. That was it's crazy because there was a list, and I was like, either I'm going to do Kappa or I'm going to do BADT. Yeah, I chose BADT, so that's good. Okay, so we put our brains together. Okay, I like that. Ooh, I'm like, which question okay, we talked about like your first birth experience as a doula.
I love this question, and I had to think about it. My first experience was in high school on my cousin's farm in Vermont. I know that's crazy.
I did not expect it to go there.
No, I know. But he had a dairy farm, and I used to show up and help, and I loved it. And some of the time, and also a friend of mine, a guy I dated when I was in high school, his family owned a dairy farm. And a lot of the times when cows give birth, if it's a breech or there's an issue, you have to help. And I was like shoulder deep in a glove. I had the glove on all the way up to my shoulder, where you're reaching in and grabbing legs and helping this cow give birth, right? That was my first experience. And I loved it. And I thought, I want to be a vet tech, which I was. I was a vet tech for about 9 months. Yeah. But then my first human delivery, it was in 1991. I was 21 years old. It was in Hawaii. A woman, Tina, that I worked with was pregnant, and she wanted me to be in the room with her and be her support because we were good friends. And I remember feeling like I'm a great support, and I know nothing about birth. Right. But I was there for her, and I have pictures of that. And, that's one of those things that happened. And I didn't think a lot about it at the time. It's not like that moment made me like, this is my life's mission. Right. But I gave birth to my own daughter in 1992. And as soon as she was born, like a year later, I was in birth work. So I
Wow.
think that combination of my experiences on a farm and then with birth and helping and like it's such an adrenaline rush, right? It's so great. And then with this friend of mine and then my own birth, that combination, that those were my first experiences. How about you?
Mine was, I know, because someone asked me this on another podcast and it didn't click to me until the host was like, actually your first time was supporting my wife in postpartum. And I'm like, what? I didn't even think about that.
All right.
But he was correct because he had to go on a work trip immediately after their son was born. And I was there for his wife in wait. Like you said, I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but that's my first unofficial. I was just there for her for the weekend, did everything possible. And then she, so well that she was like, can you come back after I get my tubes tied? Like she knew she was doing that in 2 months, and so I came back. But first official was a home birth that I was a friend called. Well, she wasn't a friend at the time. She was like, I saw your information online, and I was newly posting about my now business, The Phenomenal Mama. I literally was like, kind of just putting it out there post COVID, and she was like, I cannot find a backup. I got to get on a plane in a couple of hours. I need somebody to go support my client. And so I went. And that was my first, like, official, I feel like, hired moment. It was incredible. I got really lucky because the birthing mom was a dancer. Oh, the best pictures I got to show you. Like, the squat was immaculate. I can't even do that non-pregnant. The way she handled everything. She was walking around. She had everything under control. She was a music person, an arts person. That's, like, the best you can get. Her partner, her husband, was even more incredible. Made me want to call mine and be like, we got to do it again because you didn't do good. He did amazing, but this guy was, they prayed together at moments. Like, it was everything that you read or you see in the documentaries and you hope for as a doula. But that's not the norm. That's, like, my most chill. And she ended up being a transfer, home to hospital transfer. She was attempting a VBAC. It was everything rolled into one that I was like, who gets to do this as their first official doula task or whatever, doula job? And she's a doula herself. So it was just incredible. She does placenta. She had a playlist. She had the incense. All the stuff that you put on the intake form that we know it doesn't happen. Like, we're like, girl, we're going to the hospital.
It doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it was incredible. That was like my first official. But like you said, there's many over the years that you're like, damn, that was a doula moment.
You just talked about your one of your best, your first and one of your best experiences. What was your most challenging?
There's a lot of challenging ones, unfortunately, but fortunately that I was there. Which is why I felt like in that first year and a half, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome because every time I had a difficult birth, I would be in the parking lot like, am I supposed to be doing this? It wasn't until in the postpartum check-ins that the family was like, we're so grateful that you were there. They're holding your hand, they're crying because in the moment, I'm like, I didn't feel like I was that impactful. If I had to pick one, and it's maybe because I knew her for a long time, she's kind of like a longtime friend from high school. Without like going super detailed, she had a pre-existing condition with fibroids, and they were the size of cantaloupe. She had two the size of cantaloupes. We were doing this whole plan of you want to deliver vaginally. This is her first birth. She was a super planner. Like, she plans everything out to a T. She told me she had fibroids, and I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not a medical professional, so I'm like, okay, like, whatever that means, kind of. Keep me posted type of thing. And she never really talked about it anymore. She just found out about them when she got pregnant because they did ultrasound. So she did not know they were that size. She went in for a regular checkup. But was she full term? I believe so. I think she was like 36, 37 weeks. So it wasn't abnormal that they wanted to check her in. But I just felt like they were telling her what she wanted to hear versus what she needed to hear. So like fast forward, she gets checked in. They said you're going to need a C-section. It's an emergency, but they're making her wait around. So I'm doing all the things that we do where we're like, okay, let me get my kids in after school care. Let me go, setting up your personal life, which we have to do as doulas.
A lot.
I'm taking my sweet time to get to her, get to the hospital, finally the doctor gets there, takes her into surgery. Her mom went with her. She was a single mom. And when her mom came back into the room first, because I'm just sitting there chilling, waiting. And remember, I was asking you, I'm like, what's the average time? Because I feel like her mom came back in so quick. Her mom came back in maybe like 40, 45 minutes. And she's standing there. She's a black woman, but she was so pale. She was like, so I thought the words that were going to come out of her mouth were, my daughter died in surgery. I was like, I'm not prepared to hear this, to handle this. I'm not going to be a good doula because I'm like, I'm not ready for this. I've read everything, advocated for everything, especially for black women, but I'm like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I had that freeze moment like in movies where everything's moving slow motion. It's like a distorted sound. And she was like, she's fine. But the way that they reorganized her organs, I'm still like, oof. Because it's her mom saying this. And her mom's like, the way they reorganized her organs to put the fibroids back in there, I can't handle that.
Yeah, I don't get this story at all.
Remember, I was, when I was telling you before, and you were, and I was showing you the pictures, I'm like,
I don't understand this situation.
And her mom was like, even the nurses in the OR were like, when they opened her up and they could see them. And I'm like, why did they put them back? Like, that was one of those moments where I was like, everything that you've read, you just experienced, you just saw, what are we doing next? And so that was probably my most difficult, because I was like, I felt like I was about to throw up and cry and pass out all at the same time, because I'm like, if her mom came in and said she died, I'm like, you weren't ready. And then after that was when I was like, I need to do another training.
Yep.
I need to, because the challenge is like, you want to mentor with people. Like, I wish you were here in Vegas and I could have been like, can you mentor? Because I had a hard time finding a mentor too.
Yeah.
And I think people want mentorship to look like, let me shadow you. Let me come to prenatal. So I wanted somebody that could be like, you're going to encounter difficult situations. Share case studies,
Yes.
Yeah. I don't feel like we do that enough. So
I think that's a gap with doulas in our community.
It is.
So that's not a question, but it's definitely a statement. It is a gap.
So that was one of the most difficult, but I've had some unique situations. I've had a couple, they delivered at 29 weeks. So that whole first year and a half, I'm like, can I get a break? Can I get the incense with the music, with the massaging and the praying? Like, where is this? Because that's what they paint the picture of doula work as. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. What about you? Because I know you have...
I mean, aside from the fear always of losing an infant or a mom, which is like the biggest horrible thing that could happen, and I've had moms lose infants, which is hard. I think it's the Medicaid client who scraped to save up for a home birth, which wasn't covered under Medicaid. And paid for it, and we were all planned, and she was excited, and the house was set up, and I showed up, and after hours and hours at her house, the midwife said, you need to transport. So, always one of the hardest things is like when you have this ideal way that you want to give birth, and then it ends up a C-section in the hospital. So when you go from a home birth and paying the money, and I mean, it was harder for her to save up that money. It meant a lot to her. She transported, it was one of the times that you're in a room that the emergency button is hit and you're scared in that moment, because I saw her blood pressure, I saw the baby's D-cells, and a lot of the time the hospital's like, the baby's D-celling every contraction, and I'm like, normal, let it go, like, big deal. This was not that situation. This was like, oh my gosh, there's we need to get her back now. And she ended up being a C-section, and there were a lot of concerns for mom and baby, and it all turned out fine, which is that's everybody's like, healthy mom, healthy baby, and I'm like, nah, no, really,
because that waiting period.
It was that.
Like
I think that's the hardest, and it's the hardest because you see this family go through, like, on a birth plan, especially like, I want a natural birth, but I've never done it before. I'm a first-time mom, and I know how hard that it is to accomplish that. I know anyone can do it, but I also know it's really challenging to have them let go of everything they wanted in their birth plan to be the worst case scenario aside from a loss. That's the hardest, because I think as doulas we beat ourselves up. Like, at what point could I have put her in a different position or done massage or done a better hip squeeze and she would have not had this result. And it really isn't about that. So those are tough situations. You want to give your clients what they want, and we don't have control over that. So that's a tough thing.
Yeah. That's super tough. You said something about, when it comes to planning and when the plan changes. That's what I mean with the doula trainings that I'm like, we don't dive deep enough into, because you're going to show me in a training a hip squeeze, ways to have them maneuver so that baby, but we learn that in the field.
I mean, both. This is kind of a tangent, but I think the book work is really vital and important.
Yeah.
And I also think the hands-on is really vital and important. And when you don't have a great training, or you don't have someone who's willing to at least talk to you about what it's like to be in the field.
Right.
Because shadowing and mentoring, it's a hard thing to be like, hey, do you mind if this extra person that you don't know comes to your birth, the most intimate time in your life, and then you have hospital rules. That's all can be hard to navigate. So I think it's a combination of both. And I think when the doula support or the doula education, either one or both are not solid, it makes it really hard for us to be successful at doula work, because we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Little bit on the same topic, but like just because it was like a next question. You've had previous jobs, obviously.
Yeah.
What was the strangest one?
Strangest job?
Or your least favorite?
Oh, my least favorite. So when I left birth work and I had to go corporate, I worked for a guy who did negotiations with the IRS for people who were going to jail. So it's called an offer and compromise.
I was like, is he a bounty hunter?
Oh my gosh, no. So if you hadn't paid your taxes and they were threatening jail, or in this situation, my ex-husband went to prison for IRS stuff, and so I worked for him specifically because I was looking for somebody to help with an offer and compromise for my own, to remove myself from that situation legally. So he was like, I'm looking for somebody, I want to hire you. And I was like, great. So I was helping with taxes and tax evasion and offer and compromise. And he was probably 68. I was in my early, 34, in great shape. This is the man that asked me what panties I was wearing every single day. He loved having his meetings at strip clubs, his lunch meetings at strip clubs. He was always offering to pay me more if I would strip or give him a lap dance. He was obese, disgusting, every disgusting thing that you can imagine rolled into one 68-year-old deprived man. And I stayed, you hit a point when you're a single mom and you're working that I need the paycheck. Right. And I couldn't leave that job until I found something else. And it was just it was probably only 6 months, and it was a nightmare. But because of the nature of his job, he worked with Mustang Ranch, which is a whorehouse outside of Reno. Yeah. And so
I'm from Vegas. Of course I know.
Yeah, of course you know. Where prostitution's legal. And so I worked with a lot of prostitutes who were doing their taxes and stuff. Yeah. Super educational, first of all. Yeah. But just not really probably the demographic that I would have I didn't know
that about you. How interesting.
That's one of my hardest jobs.
You got it. I was going to say my job when I was 16, which was Burger King, but it wasn't nearly as bad as that. And I stayed for 3 weeks. Oh. So I quit on my lunch. I left on my lunch break and never came back. And I went and got a tattoo in somebody's bathroom. It was just. That is a side tangent.
No, my first tattoo was slamming a beer in some weird apartment kitchen of someone I didn't know, straddling the kitchen chair and letting him give me a tattoo on my right shoulder because a friend said, this guy knows how to give a tattoo.
And here we are today.
In 1990.
Right. Share all that to share. You can do anything, boys and girls.
Anything is possible, everyone. Anything's possible. Where do you think doula work is headed? And I want to change this also, for me, I've been in it so long, I know what's changed also. Right. Where do you think it's headed? What are some of the surprising changes, I guess?
I don't know that anything is surprising to me because I haven't been in it as long as you, so I'll save that part for you. I think it's headed to and I know a lot of people don't like this, or doulas aren't favorable of this, but I think it's headed to a point of like more regulated.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of that.
I am too, to a degree.
It's the military in me.
Yep.
Because we're entering spaces where it is regulated. So we can't have it, but we can't have our cake and eat it too.
Yep.
I think that we're entering with becoming Medicaid providers. But even if you aren't, access to families, you have to work in hospitals. I mean, majority of the births that you're going to attend, I've only been to 2 home births. Mm-hmm. And 1 was a transfer, so it didn't really count. But I think we're headed to a more regulated path. But I think that would be a good thing. I'm excited for it. I love the format of how I did the MA training, where it's like, do your training and then go do an externship somewhere, because then you could see, is this for me? What path do I want to go on as a doula? Do I want to go into an agency setting? Do I want to start my own business? Do I want to work at an OB's office? Like, I feel like we need that, because we know how much doulas are needed. We currently struggle with, in the state, but even nationwide, the workforce, and the burnout is real. And so I'm in favor of that. I see it heading in that direction, honestly.
You know, we've never talked about this, so I didn't know how you felt about it, but I think, look, you can never be overdressed or overeducated. That's kind of like one of my philosophies. I
love that.
And so I think regulation is necessary. You cannot be a non-medical provider. I think that's where doulas think that they can get a loophole into not being a business owner or not having something regulated. Like, I'm just non-medical. I'm over here like not doing anything harmful. And 1, it can be harmful. And 2, you're in a very medical setting, even as a non-medical provider. You cannot complain about not being treated as a member of the care team.
Yep. Correct.
And not be regulated. Like you said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. So I totally agree. I think doula work has been touted in the last couple years, especially the last 2 years since Medicaid.
I agree.
As like, we are the answer to the maternal health crisis. And I think in part that's true, but we're also not the answer to the maternal health crisis. There's so much more. We can't come in and save a broken system.
No.
A lot needs to change in the system. I think with regulation and being taken more seriously and being a non-medical part of the care team, we can see a lot of those changes. But it's not about us walking in and waving a magic wand. No. So, I agree. I think it's going to be more regulated, and I think that that's a good thing, because it will give us the access that doulas all say they want, while on the same time saying they don't want it more regulated. And learning eventually that you can't have both.
And I love that you mentioned the savior part of it, because I've seen that evolve over the years. When I first entered 2017, 18, I saw a lot of like the doulas reduce percentages and numbers and outcomes, and now they're moving away from that language, because like you said, we're not the saviors. We are contributing to a better outcome or just a better experience for families. But I didn't like the pressure of people feeling like if they have a doula,
you're not ever going to get a C-section.
You're not going to get a C-section. You're not going to have a horrible experience, because
I think that's another thing doulas don't realize, is that most doulas get into this work because of their own traumatic experience, which we have talked about that a lot, and I think that that's a good and bad thing.
Good and
agree. And they really believe that if they had a doula, it wouldn't have been traumatic first, and that if they are a doula, other people won't have trauma. And I've had the most beautiful home births that were just, you couldn't order one better.
Right.
And you know, that mom during postpartum said, these are the things that were traumatic about my situation. And I was like, I couldn't have ordered you a better birth. So, I mean, we need to understand that just because we're there and we're helping doesn't mean trauma's not still going to happen.
Correct.
And all that kind of ties into advocacy.
Yeah.
I'm not there as a bully to be confrontational and bar the door and be like, here's the birth plan. We don't really need to see you. That is not a doula's
That's
job.
I tell my families all the time, because I'm like, look, you're going to go home. I might be here next week for a birth. I do not want to fight with these people.
Right. This is my reputation and my job, but that's also not a doula's
not our role.
And I think doulas and people who hire them, have the misconception that we're there to save them from this broken medical system. And I often tell people, you know, my moms who are like, I want a completely natural birth, and they're explaining a home birth, but they're doing it in a hospital.
Yeah.
And although I think it's like home birth and hospital aren't separate, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
You can't want a home birth necessarily in a hospital setting. It doesn't quite work that way.
Right.
So, you know, I just think that there's a lot to all that whole conversation.
Yeah. That goes, I was literally going to ask next.
Okay.
What do you wish people knew most about doula work? Like, what are the misconceptions?
That's it, right?
Yeah.
We're not the savior. We're not there to bully the staff.
Yeah.
It is not my job to tell a medical professional he's wrong.
How to do their job,
No,
yeah.
I have to stay in my lane. And my understanding, somebody Google search this, is that doulas very rarely get sued. However, in the event that they do, it is often malpractice because we have not stayed in our lane. We've crossed over to something medical.
Yeah.
Whether that's giving advice or, and we have to be real careful about that.
Yeah. Because I think, to me, the biggest, and for my own personal, I didn't have traumatic, to your point. I didn't have anything that went on. I came in it from, I prepared so much. And I was like, I wonder if other moms are doing this. And that's what led me down the rabbit hole of, no, they're not.
They're not.
And one of my things that I'll say once I get comfortable with clients, I'm like, listen, I know you planned that baby shower or that gender reveal down to a T.
Yep.
And your photo shoot and all that, and that's beautiful. But you haven't even put together a birth plan. And that's like the shocker. I like to have that like moment of like, oh, damn, she's right. Like, I'm tripping. Why haven't I? Because people don't put together plans, as we know. And I think that's the biggest part of the trauma that's followed, I feel like. Because if you don't know that you have to push the placenta, we were talking about that last night.
Yep.
Like, nobody told me that. And I did all this homework and all. And after I got my baby on me and we're skin to skin blissfulness, and they're like, well, now you need to push out the placenta. I'm like, why did anybody say that?
Well, I thought it was done.
Or the fact that everybody's water doesn't break, because I'm like,
oh my
that's
gosh.
what we see in movies where it's like your water breaks, rush to the hospital, they're running down the hallway, or they're not running, but you're being pushed in a wheelchair down the hallway. I'm like, that is such a movie
doing
thing. Yes,
like trying not to push. Like I tell people
all of that.
There's 4 reasons you go to the hospital, and the main one is contractions.
Yeah.
It is not like the movies where you're in the grocery store and your water breaks and you grab the gallon jar of pickles and throw it on the floor to cover it up.
Or that water breaks like sometimes. It's
right.
tranquil.
Yeah. Interesting side note. Recently, a nurse at the hospital told me that 85% of women that come into the hospital, they break their water.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's statistically accurate perfectly.
But in my experience.
But that, right, what that told me was that 15% either say no, they don't want their water broken, or it breaks ahead of time.
Or already broke at home.
And that's a really, really low number. Anyway.
No, I think that I don't, like you said, the number wise, I don't know.
I don't know if it's accurate, but they do it a lot.
My 2 births, and then I maybe have 1 or 2 clients who, their water broke on their own. Everybody else it had to be broken for them.
It's interesting. That's a misconception. Lots of misconceptions.
There's a lot of myth busters that we could do. We could do a whole hour on that.
I think I want to segue into very similar. What's one thing you wish more people understood about doula care? But I think we kind of covered that. So what's something you would tell an aspiring doula who's just starting out?
Go through the Doula Business Blueprint.
I was like, we're both going to say, this is a business.
I would say navigate your journey, because even before the business part, you need to know who you are. Business ownership is not easy. You know, we tell people that all the time. It is the most self-disciplinary, most boundary pushing, the most resilient thing that you'll ever do in life. Like, you have to be super resilient. There's not a lot of support for you as a business owner. I would say they have to take time to put the elements together. And I mean, of course, we're joking, but like, you can do that through the Doula Business Blueprint.
You can.
Because I learned that in my marketing business. It's like a marketing and small business development hybrid. So we're like, listen, we want you to put money into your marketing. We specifically target small businesses. And we're like, we want you to invest in your marketing. We want you to know how serious it is. But we also want you to know that you got to work on small business development first. And I would say it's the same thing for doulas. Like, because again, you don't know if you want to be a business owner, and that's okay. Because now you can say, oh, are there any agencies in town? Is there somebody I can partner with? Right. Is there a path of speaking about what doula? Because that's a lane in its own. So like discovering your lane first before you take action is huge. Because I took time to, and I knew from experience. So I wish other doulas knew that, but I did not publish a website, create a social media platform, anything. I didn't even tell people really about it until I put all the main elements together. And I mean like pricing, my vision and my mission, all of that stuff. I did not roll it out until, and it doesn't have to be perfect.
It never is.
Because, you know, you'll procrastinate, but I lay the foundation first. I tell any business owner that, but doulas especially. Like, lay the foundation, because that goes back to, like, what we were talking about with training. If you lay the foundation and you start to discover things about yourself and you're like, okay, well, I want to solely be a postpartum doula. Mm-hmm. Right there, you've saved yourself so much time and money and energy, not wasting it on other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we want to be everything to every family.
And we cannot.
You can't.
No, you can't. You want to save the world. This is a very save the world profession. I think I would say, because you mentioned earlier that you did not get into being a doula from a traumatic experience. You and I have that very much in common, but I think the majority of doulas become a doula from their own traumatic experience. And my recommendation is, before you think you can go out and help someone else not have a traumatic experience, deal with your own. Like, get therapy, do what you need to do to get yourself healthy, because doulas should be unbiased, and we cannot save the world. And if you're reliving your own trauma and taking on other people's trauma, you shouldn't be a doula.
Trauma dumping.
Like trauma dumping. And
that's so real. I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people aren't going to be real with other doulas and say that, but we see it happen. Where
we do see it happen.
They'll come into a group setting, they're like, well, because this happened to me, I didn't want to, and then you're going into aggressively, like you were saying earlier, where you're like, now you're fighting with doctors, but it may not be about your client. It may be that old trauma coming up for you. That's real.
Yeah.
That's real. I'm glad that you said that, because that's kind of like one of the easiest things. I mean, you're so smart.
You're so smart.
This could be a whole hour about compliments back.
I know. Well, that is for real true. But that's why we got together, right? It's because we knew each other. We had a lot of common denominators, right? Yeah. And I think that's another thing. You know, when you find your tribe within birth work, that really means a lot, and people know that when they find it. So I think it's great we capitalized on our friendship and the fact that we found our tribe, right?
That's true.
Also, we look so much alike.
Yeah, well done. You can't even tell us apart. We're wearing the same shirt today. I love that, because also going back to something you said earlier, I said earlier about the imposter syndrome.
Yep. Okay.
It's hard to come into this work, if we're being honest, and not feel like you have to be the stereotypical doula. Not for me, but I've seen it happen where I'm like, now all of a sudden you're a yoga person, or you don't gotta be those things. Like, I love that. What is it? Is it a brand of doula?
The woo-woo doula?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. We all have different personalities, different fits, different niches. It's all of it is good. But
I always joke with my clients right when they see me, because I think if they don't follow me on social, or if they haven't like Facebook stalked me, I think sometimes they're shocked, because I'll show up in a blazer sometimes, or a t-shirt, and I think they're looking for Erykah Badu, and I'm like, she's not here.
If you want to levitate during your birth, I am not the right doula.
No, I come in with a lot of paperwork.
A lot of education.
I was dubbed the militant doula for a little bit there, and I was like, I take
Thank
that as
you.
a compliment.
Thank you.
All right. Is it? Yeah. What's the this is really such a cliche, but I feel like, you know, you're going to give us some gems. What's the most important thing that you bring to your clients? Or like, how do you establish trust with them?
I think, first of all, I'm very honest with them. And we just talked about that. Like, if you want somebody who does Reiki and sages the hospital room, I'm not the right person for you. I think my strength is education.
Yeah.
100%, because I want my clients to be so educated and so sure of their decision. And again, you can have 100 women, A third of them will want an epidural. A third of them will be adamantly against it. A third of them aren't sure. My information's not different. It's their family, their birth, and their baby.
Yeah.
And they're going to make the choices for them that are the best for their situation. And it's my job to give them the information and the education so that they make those. I don't care what their choices are.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I don't care about them. I have no emotional attachment to decisions that my clients make.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing that I bring, that my whole goal is for them to make educated decisions about their care and for me to support them in those decisions. It has nothing to do with what I would do or how I did it or any of that stuff.
Right, because that goes back to the other thing we talked about, the evolution of care. I feel like in the beginning for me, and I'm sure 16 years ago for you, they were not, in my experience anyway, I don't want anybody to come for us, but in my training, they weren't talking about ways to support your client through all of the options. It was leaning very much heavy into natural birth.
Yep.
And avoiding interventions, which that's always the goal. But like you said, maybe it's not the family's goal. And I learned that from you, saying that you just give them the options. Like, I mean, the segues into how to research. Because if they come to you day one and say, I know I'm getting an epidural, you don't need to spend your time trying to convince them not to.
No, but I think doula work started predominantly with midwifery, with home birth, and with upper middle class families that could afford a doula.
Yes.
First, they did the research, they knew what a doula was, and we realized how many people don't even know what a doula is.
Still, you can 30-minute talk and they're like, oh, so like a midwife. That's my
so
favorite.
Are you going to check my cervix? Like, dude, did we not just talk about this? I'm not feeling you up. But, you know, I really feel like it started with well-educated upper middle class women that were researching and could afford it. It kind of goes back to how it started, which is in a communal living situation where it was your auntie or your grandma or your sister, someone who had birthed a baby before you and was there to support you through it because they'd been through it, right? That's kind of how traditionally doula work started. And from there, it became a profession. But still, it's predominantly us understanding it and wanting to support women. When Medicaid and TRICARE and insurances started covering doulas, it was a stark realization for me at the socioeconomic status of women who could choose doulas and the women who were unserved that now were able to serve. And so, I think I tangented there, but you know.
No, that was like right on.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
So education is my strong point, and even more so with Medicaid or TRICARE or women who don't even know what question to ask. And they're not being more educated and having more money doesn't mean that my Medicaid clients, they're not like dumb and broke.
Well, that was something I learned with Medicaid. I'm like, if I weren't a veteran, I'd probably be on Medicaid, or I could be qualified. I'm like, I had the misconception, to be honest, of like, that was like low income, borderline poverty. And
and it's not. But also, it is a demographic of women that have not had choices because they couldn't afford to pay for them out of pocket.
Right.
So some of it is economic.
That's the majority of the population.
And like you said, And like you said earlier, you know, it's like not even knowing, being all prepared but not knowing about delivering the placenta. It's a group of women who don't even know what question to ask, and they don't know what choices that they have. Another thing that I think I teach is that you hire your OB, and the whole medical staff works for you. And
that's
I tell
one of my favorite
people,
things to tell families.
They work for you. You are their employer.
We're not taught that.
We are not.
Humans, as people. And that's one of my favorite things to tell families, and it's always a light bulb for them. They're like, you're right. I'm like, yes.
And you can fire them.
Because that was a reality for me, being like, I do not like you very much. And here you are, all up in my Kool-Aid. Like, you have seen me in all areas, and I don't like you. And I was like, if I'm hiring a midwife, it's the same as hiring an OB, a nurse, a doula. And that's one of my favorite things I tell families. And one of my 4 prenatal appointments is know your rights. And it's building your team. Your care team is one of those rights that you have to hire and fire and tell people to leave the room, or tell people you don't want them to touch you. Or that's one of my favorite things to tell families. Because they don't know.
What's something simple you say to your clients that they'll remember forever? And not maybe something that you say, we just talked about that. Those are a couple things, right? But it could be something you do also.
Yeah, I do have something that I say that I got. So that first training I was talking about that I was like, I don't love this. But she gave me one gem where I was like, okay, I got my money's worth.
Barely.
Barely. I traveled for it and everything. She said, always remember that if they come in the room and they are discussing versus directing, you always have a choice. And I was like, oh, that's such a gem. Putting it in my back pocket. I've been using it for 8 years. I'm like, that is so true. Like, that's the best thing that I say to them. I'm like, because I give a lot of information, just like you were saying. Like, we talk a lot. We were talking about our client notebooks. I'm like, mine's 34 pages. You're like, mine is 100. No,
mine's
I'm just kidding.
I think it's like 52. But yeah.
I know I'm giving them a lot of information. So that one thing I'm like, I say to all of them, I'm like, if they come in, because in those moments, they're overwhelmed. And then they look at you, and that's the worst feeling ever, when a mom looks up at you like, I don't know what to do. We come up with cues in our prenatals to be like, it's okay if you look at me, I look at you, we make contact, and we wait till they leave the room, and then we discuss it. So I tell my families that, I tell the dads or the partners that, I'm like, we don't panic in the moment because they're going to leave the room for a second. And then we can talk freely, because it's another thing, like, people have white coat syndrome. And they're like, even if it's not the doctor and it's the nurse, it's still white coat syndrome. And people are like, I don't want to say anything to offend them. I don't want them to feel like they're not doing their job. Well, even though we're under their care, we still feel that. Especially me, I had that heavy, coming from the military, you don't question authority, or if somebody's in a position of authority, you're like, yes, you are correct. Doctors have gone to school 10 plus years usually. So I tell my families that. I'm like, if they come in and they're discussing versus directing, you still have a choice.
And I say something similar.
To the flip side of that, like you said, you're like, they come in pushing buttons, it's time to rock. Like, we don't have time for you to, which sucks. But if you tell your families that in advance, like you were mentioning, the one that she saved all the money and she transferred, same with it, she didn't have to save. She was very independent, wealthy. She hired a birth photographer. She had everything lined up. She ended up at the hospital. Yeah. But because we prepared, and I felt so disappointed for her. And she afterwards was like, I felt so prepared for that because you told me, here's the stages, here's the potential complications. I even gave her a document of home to hospital transfer. Like, what should you do? Who should you call first? Can you set this up? Like, it was, I thought, very well prepared. And then she confirmed that later. So, yeah.
I tell people something similar. I like your wording, but it's not an emergency unless it's an emergency. I love that. And when it is, you'll know. There won't be any question, and there'll be nothing any of us does. Yeah. We will just deal with the emergency. But until then, always, unless you instinctively know a yes or no, just say, what are the pros, what are the cons? Can you give us 10 minutes to talk about it? Yeah. And if I could give one piece of advice, and I do it in my childbirth education classes, like, if you can take one thing with you to the hospital and you do not decide to have a doula, that is what I want you to take to the hospital. Oh, I love that. Just, what are the pros? It's the whole brain or brandy, right? But to simplify it more, what are the pros, what are the cons? Can you give us 10 minutes to talk about it? Yeah. Because you can become a Google master real fast and make a decision. Again, that's part of our job to help them navigate that. But it's not an emergency unless it's an emergency. So you have 10 minutes to talk about it. Nothing needs to happen right now. Yeah.
Everybody's favorite question, I guess we can round out with, is how do you balance it all? That's the most annoying question.
But it is, it shows me the lack of time. Well, here's what it shows me, several things. If you're asking me that question legitimately, it shows me that you have a lack of time management. It shows me that you are not a priority in your life. Right. And those are both things that are going to burn you out. We had a conversation recently about doula burnout, right? And it's like 3 to 5 years. And I made a comment at the end. I'm like, I look at everything that you guys have talked about, and all I can say is, you are doing this to yourselves. Yeah. So doulas burn themselves out. Now, if you're talking about how OBs don't treat you the way you want to be treated, or the medical professionals don't treat you, or your pay is not enough, those are separate issues. And again, we've talked about we've talked about, like, you can't be part of the care team if you're not willing to go above and beyond in your training and having some sort of regulation, because you don't get a seat at the table if you can't be at the table, if you don't have enough education or whatever to be at that table. Aside from not charging, which a lot of doulas also do to themselves, you can't do free work. You can't do all this pro bono work and then be upset that you don't make money. So that can sometimes be self-inflicted, not always, but sometimes. But most of the burnout stuff, most of that conversation, I'm like, you need to block out your calendar. We talk about this in detail in Doula Business Blueprint because it's such a big thing. There's several of our modules touch on this kind of overarching issue.
Because it's weaved into everything.
It's weaved into everything.
You were one of the first people I met that you had those focus days. And again, I learned that in business where I'm like, my Fridays are not for y'all. Like for business
My Mondays are not for anybody.
And I'm like, that was the day where I'm like, if I want to go have lunch with somebody and catch up, but I don't want to talk about business. I want to be like, friend, how are you? Let's check in, or whatever. It doesn't even have to be somebody I'm in business with. It could be my friend that's in academia. Friday was that day. I need to get back to it. There's also a lot of self-checks that you're like, okay, that's a good point. You let that one thing go, now you need to get it back. And then I think a lot of people were shocked in that conversation that we had with the larger group in the co-op where I said, Sundays I don't work.
Right.
I don't care if it's
a client. Email and text 24/7.
And a client will text you and be like, girl, my left foot is itching today. And then that spirals into
like, damn, scratch it.
And then that spirals into more than what you intended to do. So I'm like, unless I decide, or if it's a special case like a Sunday, you know, I don't work on Sundays. I'm like, if I'm not on call, meaning that, you know, you may go into labor any moment, you're only at the 20-week mark, I will respond to you on Monday. And I think a lot of people were like, oh shoot, like I never thought I could not respond to a client. Because we're at their mercy, but it's like, no.
We're not. It's a business. You can set business hours. And, you know, my doula work, again, aside from the births, which happen any day, anytime for however long, I was doing a lot of evening prenatals and postpartums and Saturdays because that's when both parents are available.
That's true.
Which meant my husband looked at me and said, so I feel like you're working 24/7. Like, do you have any days off? And I said, I do. But I realized it was a Monday when he's at work.
Yeah, that's why I picked Sunday, because we're both off.
So definitely, it's
also
Sunday, Monday, and Thursdays. People are going to be like, 3 out of 7 days, I am off. And that doesn't mean I won't do anything. That means you have to ask my permission for me to do things on that day.
It's not available to you through the booking link.
It is not available to anyone. I have it permanently blocked off. I think setting those boundaries is really important.
Yeah, I learned that in my previous business.
I did too.
Client, and it is a marketing business. It is a marketing business, and I had a client who was so offended that I didn't respond to something at 9 p.m. And I'm like, girl, it's
a business, right?
It's a business, and the same could be applied in doula work, which we talk about obviously in the
Doula Business Blueprint. Yeah.
What do you want to be the outcome for DBB?
Oh my gosh, I think with doula work back in foster care, even when I was a VA, with your marketing, you make a difference to that one. I'm not in the mindset to save the world. I want to make a difference to that one because I think compound interest is so real that will just start compounding with more and more and more. And so I really want women to step into, it's very cliche, but step into their power as a business owner.
Your power, queen. No.
I really want them to. I want them. I think imposter syndrome comes up a lot, lack of self-care, burnout, all these things that we're talking about. It's because they're not really embracing who they are and that they're a business and that they can take ownership of this. Similar to what we tell our clients, I might say, isn't that interesting that we're hypocrites in our businesses because we're not treating ourselves the way we tell our clients to treat themselves. So I think just continuing to make a difference. I want to see these women strong and powerful, great doulas, but also great business owners. How about you?
Same. I want to see way more prosperous doula businesses, way more. And I want to build the workforce in a way where it's like we are a respected profession because we're respected business owners.
Yes.
That's a part of it. I think those two things go together. So when I originally had the concept, and then when I talked to you about it, I'm like, that hasn't wavered. I'm like, I want to see more successful. I don't want to be the only one.
Yeah. We're lonely. It's really lonely.
It's lonely at the top. No,
it is.
I don't want to feel like I'm the only one with this knowledge. And
right.
that was the same, goes back to the same reason why I got into doula work. I'm like, am I the only one that feels like I'm this prepared and still not prepared? And so anytime that I have something that I'm like, this feels like such a gem, I want to share it. And that's what I want for DBB. Like you said, if it's like one person, it's like, my business took off afterwards, which it will.
Which it will.
That's what I want. I want it to catapult us into another space as business owners.